My mum was absolutely brilliant with me. She just like really knuckled down and like got me to a good standard with like reading and stuff like that. So I'm not massively affected by it, but like but it's still not my world. You know what I mean? So I kind of realized that if I was going to succeed, I was going to have to be very, very clever about like how I identified opportunities. So I was constantly looking for ways for me to learn one thing that would like potentially open a door into something else, because I was like, if I can get myself into a position where I'm sitting in front of somebody, then I can convince them to take a chance on me, And that's how I kind of did it. I went hop from one thing to the other, and basically I just assembled all these bizarre niches from all these different industries that eventually all came together.
Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of How Do You End Up Doing That with me, Alex Jeffers. This podcast is all about speaking to people about jobs they've ended up doing and what got them into doing it, because usually if people have got a bit of a story to tell about how they ended up doing what they're currently doing, if it's slightly out of the ordinary. This week's episode is with Tony Hasset, a specialist type of plasterer who works restoring old buildings and creating highly decorative mouldings in new ones too. He also works on film sets to create the backgrounds and scenes for some major Hollywood blockbuster films. I love talking with Tony about what he's worked on and hearing him go into detail about his passion for art and manufacturing. It's so fascinating to hear him talk about his experience of creating massive sculptures for people like Damian Hurst, through crafting intricate and delicate models, right the way to now he creates decorative features in some of the most famous and recognisable buildings in the UK. If you listen to this and you've got any comments or feedback, anything you'd like to say to me really, feel free to drop me an email to alex@howdyou.com. That's HOWDYOU.com. And I'll take a look at any emails that come across and hopefully I can get back to you with some answers. So let's get stuck into our conversation with Tony. Cheers! Hello Tony, how's it going, man?
Yeah, good mate. How are you keeping?
Yeah, all good, all good. Busy. You know how it is. But yeah, all good. So thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast
My
today.
pleasure.
Yeah, do you want to give us a bit of I guess what's your job title at the moment? Like, what is your actual job?
So I'm an ornamental and historical plasterer. I do a lot of restoration work, and yeah, so working in like royal houses or like libraries, cinemas, anything restoration, any listed buildings, that kind of stuff.
And it's a certain type of plastering you do, isn't it? It's not just
Yeah,
regular. It's
it's fibrous,
fibrous, yeah.
fibrous plastering. Yeah, yeah. So it's split into a few things. So there's the fibrous plastering, which is like where you take like a canvas. It's plaster of Paris that's reinforced with canvas, and it's splashed into molds, and that takes on all these different architectural moldings, and there's a lot of geometry involved in it and fitting, and that's one side of it. And then the other side of it, which is more the kind of like historical restoration side, is lime plastering, which is like an old traditional type of plastering that basically lasts for a very long time.
My only experience of lime is that we've got a massive bag of it in our utility room that seems to be lasting a very long time because nobody wants to take it off their hands. We had to buy some to do some not rendering mortar, like laying bricks. What is it? Mortar between bricks would be
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
as the
Pointing, were
aggregate.
you? You doing a bit of
Yeah,
pointing?
doing a
Yeah,
bit of pointing, but we ended up with a 25 kilo bag of lime, which we've
yeah.
used
Right.
about 5 kilos of, and now just
Oh,
have
okay.
a 20
Oh,
kilo.
good stuff to have around anyway.
Good for disposing bodies, I think, isn't
As
it?
you said that, yeah.
But yeah, good to have you on, Tony. I haven't spoken to you.
Nice one,
I haven't
man.
spoken to you too long. So yeah, let's I guess start right back at the beginning with school, as I always seem to. So what was school like for you? What did you do? What were your sort of interests back in the day?
Well, school was a bit of a difficult one for me. I never really felt comfortable or happy at school. I was one of the major problems was I was in an academic school which didn't have any kind of like which didn't have I didn't have any like carpentry or metalwork or anything like that. I was studying like geography and biology and all that kind of stuff, and I'm a much more like hands-on type of person. Like I like making stuff and building things, and it just didn't work for me. And at the time, I think I had a lot of kind of curiosity about the world and stuff like that. And when I was growing up in Limerick, I didn't see a lot of stuff that I kind of like related to around me growing up. So I was always searching outside and trying to find stuff. I mean, in the years that's passed, like Limerick has really, really thrived creatively. Um, but at that time, I just felt maybe I was just unlucky that I didn't meet the people or whatever. But
So, but you were, you sort of stuck with it right the way through.
yeah,
Is it? It's not GCSEs in Ireland, is it?
it's
It's
so it's a leaving cert. So
okay.
like you've got like the junior cert you do when you're like 15, and then you have the leaving cert when you're like 17, 18. I think it's still like that now, but I don't know. Maybe it could have changed. It's a long time ago now.
Okay, so your leaving cert is the same as A levels over in
Yeah,
the
so you do
UK.
that, and then you'd go to university after that or whatever.
Okay, so what sort of subjects were you doing round about leaving cert kind of time?
Yeah, so yeah, that's the difference. I think it's different over there. So we did like 8 or 9
Ah,
subjects right up until like the leaving cert is quite extensive.
okay.
Um, So I was doing like biology, geography, history, kind of like the Anunnaki kind of nerdy stuff. That was like the stuff that I got on with most was the kind of that type of thing. But like there was a lot of, let's say, business and that, so all that sort of stuff. So I was waiting for school to end a lot of the time. I mean, I had a 40-minute art class a week. That was the closest thing that I felt that I had any kind of creative you know, output or whatever at the time. So I really struggled with it.
So there was no like art class, art sort of art didn't form part of the leaving cert or any kind of.
Yeah, no, it did. It was a
Oh,
part. It
right.
was a subject of it, but it was like you got one class a week or whatever,
Oh, okay.
one maybe two, like 30, 40 minute classes. So it was just. It was. I felt it was a slog.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So what was kind of the plan then after you've gone through school, then you're leaving cert? Was the plan then to go into university or was
Yeah, well, it was kind of. I mean, I always kind of had an eye on university, but yeah, I mean, I played a lot of sport. I played a lot of rugby and hurling when I was growing up, so that was a big part of my life. And that at that time, that was kind of like the outlet, basically. So where I had the outlet from all the frustration of being at school and not really enjoying it, the outlet was sport. Basically, is where I kind of got my own kind of back. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And two very, very physical sports, rugby and
Yeah.
hurling.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that was it. I ended up breaking my neck when I was 19 playing rugby.
Oh man, that's
Oh mate, I've broken all my fingers. I've broken my nose, my eye socket. But like the list is unbelievable. Yeah,
all through rugby.
all through rugby growing up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My
Oh,
leg, my arm, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, my sternum, my teeth. Like the weirdest thing about it now, looking back on it, was how much I just accepted it. It was the most like logical thing in the world to me. Looking back at it now, I just think it's demented.
yeah.
It's like now that I'm closing in on 40 and I'm starting to feel it all like like maybe I should have like been less combative.
So rugby, sport was your creative outlet. Was
Yeah.
kind of pursuing a like a pro rugby career, sort of on the
Yeah,
cards.
I mean, it was like I played a good standard of it. I went to because what happened was after I broke my neck, I ended up going down to New Zealand and I was playing down there. And while I was there, I met a guy who was like a pretty prominent graffiti writer. He was an Irish guy called Adam Connor. He was very prominent in the Irish graffiti scene, but he just happened to be in New Zealand while I was there traveling as well, and we spent a lot of time together working on sketchbooks and stuff like that, and breaking into train yards and doing like top to bottom, end to end freight trains and lots of illegal graffiti at the time to get the buzz. That was what, and the more time, because the more time I was down there, the like was spending time with people that were like very creative. I felt as like I had less in common with the people that I was playing rugby with, and that's when it was like when things really started to come into focus about following like a kind of a creative path.
Yeah. So you've gone to school, gone to down to New Zealand to do rugby, and ended up more in the creative side of things.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It was meeting people who were like, tattooists, graffiti writers, break dancers, people that were into DJing. It was hip hop. It was like basically it was like hip hop was something that, yeah, kind of gave me an outlet and gave me a way to learn from people that were older than me. There was like that's one thing that's great about hip hop is this great mentorship. People challenge you to do a lot, to get better.
I was speaking to Captain the other week
No,
about
yeah.
hip hop.
Shout out, Captain.
And he was saying he was kind of talking through his background in hip hop, kind of growing up, and how it inspired a lot of what he did and the work that he was doing. So it kind of like a surprising way with the work he was doing through hip hop. He found really inspirational working with kids, teaching them how to do raps and like bringing
This
them into that
big
sort of culture.
mentorship, yeah.
Yeah,
A
it's kind of.
huge culture within hip hop is to each one teach one.
I wish I had no idea about it. I like a bit of hip hop, but
Yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah,
say I'm an expert.
yeah. And that's what you got captain for, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's very much the expert. So you New Zealand, and then kind of get more in with the arts crowd while you're over there. Then do you go straight back to Limerick?
I came after New Zealand. I found out about an art school in Carmarthen, and they had a great name for sculpture. Yeah, I ended up there. They were very very open to leaving you. They gave you a lot of freedom and like allowed you to kind of dictate the path that you wanted to take with your ideas and your course. And it was a really great place. And I at that point I was still playing rugby and stuff like that, but the art was definitely taken over. And I met some really good people down there. Finished out the degree course and all that. From there, what happened was one of the guys that was at that I was at uni with, he ended up getting a job at a place called Pangolin Fine Art Foundry, Pangolin Editions, and that's a bronze foundry in Stroud, and they do large scale international sculpture. So you're talking about artists like Damian Hurst and Mark Quinn and Gormley and like all these huge international artists. And but then they'd also have lots of kind of like really interesting independent kind of like lesser known sculptors and stuff like that coming through the foundry as well. So one day I was working in a restaurant in Cardiff. A friend of mine sent me, just like popped up on my phone. I was constantly trying to do drawing, and like I was constantly trying to put myself out there creatively or whatever, but I got a photograph on my phone of a Pegasus, this amazing bronze Pegasus with all these wings like coming off it. And it was like stripped on one side of its skin, like a horse does, all that kind of stuff, with exposed muscle tissue. And it just blew my mind. And I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, and how do I get in it? Like, then but like my mate, he was like setting me up with an interview with these people. Went down there absolutely dressed to the nines, like completely overdressed for an interview like this. I had like a 3-piece suit with like a long, like full length coat, like patent shoes, the whole lot. I looked as if I absolutely knew what I was doing. And when I turned up, I was so nervous when I was talking to this woman called Claude Koenig, who she was the wife of Runway Kingdon, he was actually related to Eisenbart Kingdon Brunel. Yeah, direct descendant. So I mean, it doesn't make you a genius, but it doesn't hurt, right? Where he was very much as close as I've come to a genius, and he was a really fascinating man. But I was chatting to Claude, and I just burst into like first and foremost, she asked me what my name was, and I made this weird like noise because I was so nervous. And she was like, "Look, just calm down and just explain what you do, like."
Right.
So I went on to this huge rant about passion and creativity and art and all this sort of stuff. And I was ranting and ranting and ranting. And she was sitting there. And after I finally stopped, she went, okay, but what do you do? So I was like, oh, so I I showed her because well, while I was at university in Carmarthen, I studied ceramics, so I did a lot of sculptural ceramics, a lot of figurative illustration, printmaking. I was doing all sorts. I got like a real wide variety of art when I was there. So I showed her all this, and she was like, okay. She was like, well, you can do some bits of model making, mold making with like celastic rubbers and stuff like that. Because at the foundry they do the thing called it's a lost wax technique, right? So you'll have a sculpture. They'll let's say you mix up a two-part silicon rubber, paint it over it, build it up to a certain thickness, reinforce it with like a fibrous material, and then you make like a plaster fiberglass case, right? At which point you open the mold when it's all cured and whatever, and you've got two parts of it, or multiple parts. It can be infinite amount of parts. But usually you'll have like anywhere between 2 and 4, maybe 6 parts of it.
Okay.
You paint melted wax into the mold. That in turn builds up a thickness. You then put the mold back together, and you fill the inside of the hollow with like a core. It's like a material of like plaster, brick dust, and stuff like that. Then you take the mold apart, build what's called an investment mold at this point, which is another case around this. The sculpture now is like looks like just a wax, an identical wax copy of the sculpture. You then encase that in a further mold, and you heat it up so the wax melts out, and where the wax is melted out, there's now a three-dimensional negative area of where the original waxwork would be, and that's where you pour your bronze in. So that then fills up, and then what you do is you smash away the mold, so you destroy the mold, and then you pull out your piece of bronze, at which point it's taken away and metalworked, and at some point reassembled, and then it goes through a patination process where you can apply lots of different colors and stuff like that, and then you got your sculpture. So that's one side of the mold making process. The other one was sand molding. So that's for bigger sculptures. So you would take your sculpture, you would decide on your design of your mold, then you would really painstakingly compact sand into these like little blocks all around sand mixed with silica. You compact all that sand into different blocks, because it's important to take out undercuts, right? It's all technical mold making stuff, this, but basically I'm trying to think of how to simplify it. So you compact all this sand around this sculpture, take the mold apart, put it back together again, turn it upside down, do the opposite side of it, put it back together again, and then what you do is you melt a huge amount of bronze. So you're talking doing bronze pours of like over a ton, and then you're working in a team of other foundrymen. And what would happen is this huge furnace would like lift up the crucible, this massive crucible. It comes up in these hydraulic arms, and it's one of the most awesome sights I've ever seen in my life. You know, with this huge like crucible full of like with a graphite crucible, and this huge hydraulic machine lifts up. It looks like the sun is rising.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you're obviously in fire retardant foundry protective clothing with like the big helmets and the visors and all this sort of stuff. And you've got like guys like scraping out like the slag, which is like the impurities of the molten bronze, and it all pours into this crucible that's attached to a crane. And then basically you have to really trust the guy who's piloting that crane, because he's sending a pot of molten bronze from one side of like a huge foundry to the other, while you're standing on top of these massive molds. Some of these molds are like 20 tons, the sand are like 20 tons. So you're using these huge 20-ton, sometimes you're using two 20-ton cranes in conjunction with each other just to flip these things over. So the entire building is creaking, and like, because of the size of these things. At which point you're standing on top of these massive molds, and that pot of molten bronze comes towards you. You and one of your partners take control of the pot, and you've got like on one side of it you've got like a steadying handle, on the other you've got this massive like a wheel, and you've got a support team around you who have wheelbarrows full of sand that they are going to throw on you if you catch fire, right? So, and you catch fire because
What? You do?
you're catching fire. So you're like, so when you're, because you have to be totally committed to the pour. So you've got this you've got this like huge kind of like almost like a funnel on the top of the mold, right? And you need to dump the bronze into the mold, right? But if you're hesitant, you can end up trapping air, right? If the flow of bronze into the mold isn't consistent,
Mm.
you can end up having like basically cause problems. And because each of those molds are single use, and they can take months and months and months to make, so you've got one shot. So you gotta get it right. And when it goes wrong, it can be really, really
Yeah, I
heartbreaking.
can imagine. How often did it go wrong?
It can go wrong quite a bit because there's so many different factors. Like, there's like, so one of the things that can happen with the silicon that's mixed with the sand, when it's compacted, it needs to be gassed off with CO2 in order to cause a chemical reaction, which turns it almost like a stone. But depending on weather conditions, the silica can flow into the sand at varying levels. So you get some of the sand which is very friable, some of it then is almost like treacle. That's when things go really wrong, and that's a problem. But anyway, when you're at the pour, so you're dumping it in, and what happens is this kind of like funnel at the top of the mold fills up to the brink, and then at that point, then you're kind of like balancing the crucible to kind of keep the funnel full, but obviously without it spilling over. And like metal at that heat, it looks like the way water moves, but as if you've pressed the fast forward button. 'Cause it's so hot, it moves. It's obviously a liquid, but it moves very rapidly and it's very dynamic. So it's when it splashes everywhere. So that's splashing up on your clothing, but you're obviously so focused on what you're doing, like you don't really notice, but you're catching fire. But you can feel your friends like launching sand at you to basically keep the thing under control. And at which point, this is where you have to have a bit of like this is where the kind of craft of it is really crucial, because if you're dumping that amount of hot molten bronze into a confined space, you've got what's called a runner, which is like the in tube, and you've got risers, which are the out tubes, because the bronze goes in, fills up, and you've got these tubes that are called risers that allow all the air, the hot air, to leave the mold. And then what happens is the bronze fills up where your sculpture is inside, and it rises up these little tubes. And when it pours out onto the top of the mold, that's how you know it's full. But if you don't have enough risers for how much bronze you're putting in there, basically what can happen is the whole thing can explode. It can lift off you're talking like tons of material getting lifted off the ground in like quite a big explosion. And like,
Wow.
and that happens like I've because these are guys that are like arch fettlers. These are like these aren't like like engineers that like are like do hydrodynamic analysis and all this sort of stuff. These are people that are really just real um, artisan kind of craftsmen. So they'll
That's just mad. Like, because like, when you were saying all that, I was thinking these guys have got to have kind of like there's got to be engineers working there as well to sort of.
they're local lads. A lot of them were just local lads that had no background in art or anything like that. That were all from around the Gloucester area. Really super talented guys, like that. Just like they saw it as more like as a trade.
Oh, okay.
It had that kind of that was more like that. Like that, you're better off almost having that mindset than having an artistic mindset in a foundry like that, because you can have conflicting kind of motives going on. But the one thing I will say is you'll learn a lot in there.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine you would because if you think well, because a lot of the stuff you were doing, you were creating art with other people or for other people.
For other people. So yeah, so what would happen was they would come in with like sometimes with an idea, sometimes with a finished sculpture. We were doing things like live casting. We were doing all. So I mean, I'm not even sure I could tell you some of the stuff that we've molded, like, but a lot of very strange and wild and wonderful animals and skeletons and like loads and loads of pretty bizarre stuff, really.
Okay.
And then it's all assembled, and then the foundry kicks into gear and like actually makes the piece of sculpture.
Because yeah, if you're kind of doing that as an artist, I suppose you would want to put your own stamp on that and put your own personal
Yeah, well,
touch
that's
on it.
the thing. Well, you have to get that out of your head.
Yeah.
You got like you're there to facilitate other artists' work. So you basically you have to have the mindset that you're an artisan.
Okay.
Like it's more of an artisan than an artist. I mean, there's the reason that I was so interested in it. I was like, because I knew how labor intensive it
Hmm.
was to make sculpture on that level, and I was like, one of the things I'd run into time and time again when I was in the education system was that like people had like rough ideas of how to do stuff, but there's nothing like doing the real technical side of these trades for like 8 to 10 hours a day
Yeah.
for years. Like you can't like to get to the upper echelons of it to really, really develop like super finesse. Is something that I'm still chasing. You know what I mean? I think like hopefully one day I get there, but like it takes a lot of that, and like unless you're some kind of millionaire, you ain't going to be playing around with bronze. So it was a way of hijacking other people's know-how and experience, basically.
Yeah, I guess you need to get that kind of hands-on experience. That stuff that you can't be taught. You really have to learn and get
Yeah.
so.
I mean, we give it a go. Myself and Ryan Turner, shout out Ryan Turner. We made a furnace once in our shed and nearly blew ourselves up. We were pouring molten aluminium in flip flops and drinking cider. We made a furnace out of some gas burners, and the thing that cracked it on the second day, we found out that a stainless steel cocktail shaker was for like £1 from a reputable supermarket. Uh, was the perfect thing to melt aluminium in. You can haphazardly go at it like that. Working on real super high end stuff like that was, it developed a lot.
Yeah, I can
Um,
imagine the just the level of skill, the danger, like the danger that goes into it, the level of skill and craftsmanship, and knowing that you need to have that team around you. That's something that you can't get anywhere
yeah,
else. See, there's no.
no, exactly, and you got to get used to each other. But like, what one thing that I loved about the bronze pouring was just like it just felt like time slowed down. And in a way it was great because like within the foundry there was like politics here and there and stuff like that, but the sandcasters were kind of like left to their own devices because it's such a mental thing that not very many people would do it. And like also it's a very, very physical thing, so you're using like pneumatic like jackhammers and
Okay.
like you're pulling things apart and smashing things with sledgehammers, and it's like there's a lot going on. So they were kind of like left to rule their own. It was like, they called it the People's Republic of Sandcasting. It was great. They're like pirates. They're brilliant. They're really, really interesting characters. So
Sounds like a yeah, especially
it was great.
the
It was
the
great.
Stroud Gloucester kind of way. There's a lot of kind of crazy
Oh,
crazy fellas up there.
a lot of ley lines down there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nice views and ley lines,
Mm.
and not very many police in comparison to the size of the area. But anyway, but yeah, and then things took a twist there because I wanted to develop. That was the thing that like my ambitions didn't marry up with the foundry because I definitely they wanted me to pick one department and stay in that department and become like a basically a useful employee,
Okay.
the long-term employee to the company, whereas I still wanted to go out and learn as much as I could that I could feed back into myself. And I was working with an amazing specialist equestrian sculptor, Georgie Welsh. She's really worth checking out. She does amazing sculpture. She said to me, she was like, she pulled me to one side and she was like, "Look," she said, "saplings don't grow in the shade of bigger trees." She was like, "You are a sapling," and she said, "Pangolin is a very big tree." Uh, so she was like, "If you're not going to, like kind of toe the line or not toe the line or whatever, but like kind of, up and down," she was like, "You should find out what this thing called fibrous plastering is." I had no idea what it was, but I was like, "Okay." So then I googled it. I googled that. Different things transpired. I ended up leaving the foundry for every year for 5 years. I applied for Hales and Howe in Bristol. They're a fibrous plastering firm in Bristol. They've been all over the world. They're like one of the most respected companies in the world for fibrous plastering. But I would get like walked around the studio or whatever, but never ended up getting the job. So this went on all the time. And what happened was I ended up getting a job as a model maker. So then I was working in vacuum casting and like light engineering and
What sort of models were
uh,
they? What kind of?
so it was like I was working in a company called Amalgam in Bristol, but we were making like prototypes. Sometimes it was like stuff for TV. stuff for advertising, stuff for the fire brigade. Like I think there was some bits of military stuff here and there. Then there was they made scale models of like boats and all sorts of stuff like that. So basically, there were some absolute geniuses in that place. There was like some really really clever people. So yeah, I worked with them for a few years, but it wasn't really my thing. Like I learned a lot from it, but it wasn't where my heart was at, and I was kind of constantly banging down the door to try and get into Hales and How. And there was basically anybody that kind of passes through Bristol as a maker at some points will come across like Cod Steaks, and Cod Steaks are another model making company. They were involved with stuff with Ardman, and they do kind of like large scale like sculptural model making and stuff like that. And eventually I ended up getting like a few weeks work with them, and I'm sitting down. We're making these kind of Ferrari simulator, 3D simulator things that were being sent out to Dubai. And I was like, we were like sanding these things down, getting them ready for spray paint. And I just started chatting to this guy who was like one of the head makers there. A guy called Ollie Hales. And while we were chatting, he was like, "Look," he said, "you seem to be a maker, and you're into this, that, and the other." He was like, "But what would you really like to do?" And I said, "I'd like to be a fibrous plasterer." And he just looked at me like I had two heads, you know? And I was like, "What?" And he went, "Who told you to say that?" And I was like, no one." I was like, I don't know what you're talking about." And he goes, "Oh yeah." He was like, "What company would you like to work for then?" And I was like, "I'd like to work for Hales and How." I was like, "They're amazing. I've seen all their stuff." And he burst out laughing. He was like, "Fuck off, mate." He was like, he said, "Who put you up to this?" He was like, "What's going on, you know?" I said, "Mate, I have no idea what you're talking about." And he goes, "Well," he's like, "My name is Ollie Hales." He was like, "You're talking about my dad." And he was like, I was like completely blown away by it. And he was like, "You've been applying for 5 years." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Was it really hard to get in?" He's like, "No." He was like, "They just probably didn't know what to do with you." So he rang him back up, and then I got a chance to go in there. But I nearly fucked it up for myself, to be honest, because I ended up having a row with Ollie before he put the word in for me. But
Oh,
like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was just it was a workshop principle thing, but it was about tidiness in the workshop and whose role it was to clean things up. But I remember he infuriated me. But like I remember walking away and I was like, why couldn't I just keep my mouth shut? I was like, I should put this up, but thankfully he didn't. He put a word in for me. And then yeah, I went in with Hales and How, and with them, I just like traveled basically the length and breadth of the country, over to Ireland and all over the place, like going to every single theatre that you can imagine. From the Old Vic, the Royal Opera House, the Royal Albert Hall, the Winter Gardens in Blackpool, up to Glasgow. It was just this constant rolling adventure of all these bizarre places, and
amazing! Like that's
yeah,
just yeah, like such a I guess kind of like quite a leap, but kind of taking it back a bit. So you've gone from making these massive bronze statues and like sand casting and things like that, right down to
yeah.
intricate, tiny models.
Model making for a bit,
Like,
yeah,
and then to go from that to then, just it just like what
yeah,
was there a thing that kind of made you think I've done with the sand, I've done with the casting. I want to work for Hales and How, but model
yeah.
like what was it that got you thinking I'll do the models in the
Well,
interim?
basically, what it was at the time, I'm a big believer in identifying transferable
Okay.
skills. Like so like I'm dyslexic, and I can read and write to a good standard and all that sort of stuff. You know, my mum was absolutely brilliant with me. She just like really knuckled down and like got me to a good standard with like reading and stuff like that. So I'm not massively affected by it, but like but it's still not my world. You know what I mean? So I kind of realized that if I was going to succeed, I was going to have to be very, very clever about like how I identified opportunities. So I was constantly looking for ways for me to learn one thing that would like potentially open a door into something else. Because I was like, if I can get myself into a position where I'm sitting in front of somebody, then I can convince them to take a chance on me, you know. And that's how I kind of did. I went hop from one thing to the other, and basically, I just assembled all these bizarre niches from all these different industries that eventually all came together.
What is like well, when you're working for Hales and How, what was the kind of what was your average week look like? Was there an average
Fire.
week?
No, there was never. So this was the thing. It was you were constantly having to sharpen your wits because like I could turn up like normally you'd kind of know maybe the week before where you were going to go, but you could get a phone call and go, oh, there's been a ceiling collapse in a theater in Edinburgh. You got to go now. Like we need you to go now. So you'd head straight up there and like you'd try and make the place safe and start the kind of process of surveying the ceiling and reporting back what he's doing and all that sort of stuff. And then over time, you'd go up there with like sometimes you'd have more and more extensive teams. You could be working on a project for a day. Sometimes you could be working on a project for months and months and months. So it was constantly changing. You were always living out of so I'd be away from Monday to Friday every week, and then I'd come back to Bristol. I'd have my weekends in Bristol, and then I'd be gone again on the Monday. So yeah, and I could be anywhere. So I know every back alley in Britain at this point. Like every pub and back alley and chancer in the UK, I've probably rubbed shoulders with at some point
Every
through the
regional arts centre across the land.
yeah, exactly. And like places like that, but then like stately homes.
Oh, okay.
You're just meeting a bizarre mix of people.
Yeah, because I guess the sort of stuff you're doing, it's not regular plaster. It's like molding and real intricate designed.
Yeah, highly
Yeah,
decorative molding. Yeah, yeah. Lots of kind of like, domes and vaults and cornices, moldings. Like some half of it is like trying to make sure that the stuff that's there doesn't collapse,
Mhm.
and some of it has collapsed and then putting it back so it looks identical to the way it was before
Yeah. How does
and
that
something.
kind of work? Like, if you get there, part of the ceiling's collapse, and you've got this really
Yeah.
intricate, highly decorative design that was running across the whole of the ceiling, who
Yeah.
then is it then your responsibility to sort of redesign that or to?
Well, what it would be is you'd have so in some cases, depending on like how important a piece of historical architecture it would be. Let's say the whole thing hit the
Yeah.
ground. The whole thing came down. What they'd do is they'd painstakingly pick up all the different pieces and label them all, and basically reassemble the sections of the ceiling like a giant jigsaw in the workshop. At which point you'd model it all back up in plaster, and then you'd make molds. So it was all with the mold making was the thing that allowed me to jump from one area to the other. So then you'd make these molds, and then you'd recast them in plaster, and then you'd reassemble the whole ceiling. Basically, that's like fibrous plaster and restoration work. But you can also obviously have brand new stuff.
So with
You know,
the brand new stuff, is that you kind of designing the patterns that go into that?
Yeah, I mean, it would be you. So a lot of it would be quite traditional. So there's like there would be there's like you've the like architectural orders and stuff like that, classical architectural orders. You have all the columns and all that sort of stuff. There's like strict ratios and laws about how certain things look from different periods. These well established companies would have stock from hundreds and hundreds of different manor houses, wherever, even just in like terrace houses, wherever there's Victorian, Edwardian kind of stuff or whatever, they would have catalogs of all those profiles and molds of all these period features, that can be made new, even though the original mold might have been taken like 100, 200 years before. So yeah, and they keep producing these things, or they can be modeled up in clay and made from scratch. Yeah, so it's really, really varied. It's got a lot of cross section of different skills that all
Yeah,
intersect.
it sounds yeah, proper combination of skills that you've built up over time. So you worked for this
Yeah.
company. How long were you working for them?
Oh, I can't remember. I was with them maybe a few years. Yeah, a few years. I think for 2 or 3 years. I
Okay.
think with them. But what happened was it wasn't enough for me to be a fibrous plasterer. I wanted to also do lime plastering because certain periods, right? The older buildings are predominantly made in lime, right? Most of that stuff is made in situ, right? So they call it running in situ. So they'll be running cornice in situ. But they'll cut a profile out of tin, and they'll make up these running rails, and they'll basically pile up the plaster in front of this tin profile, and they'll pull it through, leaving behind the cornice in situ. Fibrous plastering is more modern kind of system, and what that was they would actually make that in the workshop and then transfer it and fit it at site. But I wanted to have the full range. I wanted to be well versed. I didn't want to just be niche. That's always been my thing. I've always wanted to know as much as I can. So I wanted to, spread out. So I ended up leaving that company because I wanted to learn another branch of plastering, and that was on another team of guys. And we ended up doing a big restoration job in Bybury Court. So that allowed me to develop my lime plastering skills. With a really really good crew of guys. Francis Stacey, he's a good lime plasterer. He taught me a lot. And then from there, I kind of had enough of a cross section to then just kind of like really go out on my own and basically become a bit of a soldier of fortune and kind of move between all the different restoration companies and all the different projects that I wanted to. That gave me the flexibility I needed.
So with that sort of level of having the sort of the very broad but niche kind of experience in both those two areas
Exactly.
of plastering, you go freelance. How do you find jobs off the back of that? Is it just through contacts that you've made over the years?
Yeah, that is a
Mm-hmm.
huge thing. That is an absolute huge thing. It's like I'm very, very lucky to have met some very loyal, just really good mates through it, like that, like really look out for each other because you're spending so much time, like when you're in that world, traveling and away from home, you almost like a second family to each other. If not a first family in some ways. So you see each other for more than your own families for sometimes. That network is very, very strong because a lot of it goes on
Okay.
word of mouth. Who your reputation is very, very important in it.
But
Like
does anyone ever, I don't know, approach you kind of that you haven't spoken to sort of like say, oh, we've
yeah, that happens too. So like you'll have an element of that, or there's like lots of different like restoration companies, all
Mhm.
over the country. And basically, what I'd do is I'd reach out to all of those companies, send through my CV, ring them up, explain who I am, talk to them about what potential projects they've got, what like coming in, how long the time period is, what's expected, budget, all that sort of stuff, and then all depending on what's going on, I might take that job, or else like a friend of mine might ring me and tell me about a job that he's been working on because it's a small world. You get to know each other, even if you haven't been directly in contact with each other. With the internet and Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that, you're aware of each other's work at the very least.
there's a lot. There must be a lot of that people sharing the work that they've done because it's so niche and unique that there must be a big,
Yeah.
I guess not big Instagram community, but
Oh, no, you'd be surprised. There's because people are connected through it all over the world, and you've got like different like Japanese plastering, and you've got like Venetian plastering. It's such an ancient thing, and it's so broad that you could spend your entire life studying it, and you'll never know it all. Never. Like there was a guy I met. He was amazing, John Haynes. He was the wildest man I think I've ever worked with. I was just completely amazed by how effortless he made all of it look. And I said to him, I was like, wow, man. I was like, you really know your stuff. And he was like, me, mate? Nah. He's like, I don't know anything. And I was like, okay. I was like, that's clearly not the case, but I see where you're coming from. And then he goes, let me tell you a little story. He was like, once he was like, I was like you, and I was looking at somebody who was absolutely amazing. And I told him that they were incredibly amazing, and they said, no, they weren't. And he said he worked with this guy for years and years and years until he came to his retirement. And then on the last day, as he was walking out of the job, the old boy went, now I know everything. It's just that kind of, just like those kind of characters. It's all lots of working class men, and it's an unbroken line of information that goes back hundreds of years.
okay, yeah,
And it's really technical stuff that's made with really, really simple and really practical tools.
right, yeah, of course, because it's not I guess the tools, like if you look at, like I've been doing quite a lot of woodwork around the house at the moment, and
Yeah,
if the tools that would have been used in woodworking projects back when a lot of this house was built were
yeah,
hand saws.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah,
and now we're, 50, 60, 70 years later, and
yeah,
I can buy a different electric saw for
yeah, yeah,
whatever
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
need to do in this house. And but those, back in the old days, it would have just been saws. And with
yeah,
plastering, like we've had people around the house to do just basic skimming of the walls, and it's
yeah,
like the tools that they are using.
yeah,
Maybe they're using an electric mixer now rather than
yeah,
doing
yeah.
it
But
by
it's still
hand.
hand tools. Yeah,
But the actual application of it on the walls and the shaping
yeah,
of it is still exactly the same tools.
yeah, yeah. It's all down to skill. So you've got like basically you've got some water and you've got some powder
Mm.
and you've got a trowel, and then there's after that skill. You know,
Yeah.
that's it.
Do you find that there's a lot of it being passed down like generation to generation? So
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely that's like I'm on a job at the minute in central London, and I'm lucky enough to be working alongside a master plasterer, like a really amazing guy. And there's like he's like in his 60s, his mate is in his 60s. There's like, you know, us, there's a group of us in around our mid 30s. Then you'll often have like an apprentice who's in his early 20s or whatever. So there's this brilliant like passing of skills in the trade, but also you know, philosophy and like, you know, like outlooks on life and, you know, kind of mentorship. And it's just it's one of the things that I really feel grateful for is that I get that I have the connection to these men from older generations, that we have this shared passion for what we do. You know, I probably would have never met those people, like, you know what I mean, and not have access to their life's experience, you know.
It's just amazing. So, are there any big projects that you're working on at the moment that you can talk about, or anything?
Yeah, I'm working. It's like I'm working in central London. It's like this huge. It's this massive building. It's like a skyscraper kind of building near Liverpool Street Station. But bizarrely, like one section of the building is like a listed building. So you got this huge glass skyscraper, and out the side of it is sticking this like grade two listed building. And we're completely restoring all the fibrous plaster work in the ground floor. So it's all these massive beam cases and floral motifs and columns and capitals and all that sort of stuff.
So, what's I guess what like is there anything coming up? Any big projects that coming up or anything? Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I didn't get onto yet was, so as a result of learning these skills in fibrous plastering, what most most people don't realize is, but most film sets that you see, they're all made in plaster. It's all plaster. Yeah, so like when you see those like huge sprawling cliff faces and you see those castles and stuff like that in Game of Thrones or Aquaman, all these kind of things, right? That's majority of that stuff is plaster. So the studios need fibrous plasterers to basically build their sets. As a result of being a fibrous plasterer, I ended up then becoming a film plasterer. So
Okay.
for the last 3 years or so, I've been working in like Warner Brothers and Pinewood and all these different places, building all these big movie sets and stuff like that. Um, but it's all those fibrous plaster. So they have it. They call it the inside and the outside. So the inside is when you're in the films. The outside is when you're out and about, basically. But it's all the same skills and all the same connection. The people are all connected through the same way, you know.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that with the plastering side of things. I remember. Oh, did you watch Stranger Things?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I remember seeing a thing about that where the upside down for Stranger Things is actually all made up from pool noodles and black spray paint.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, you've got different departments within the film industry. Then you'll have like your scenic painters,
yeah.
you'll have plasterers, model makers, then you'll have the greens, which are the people that are over all the like vegetation and plant life and stuff like that. Special effects. So you've got all these different departments of artisans in the construction side of the film industry, that would build these like huge sprawling. Some of the sets are just enormous, like
Okay.
absolutely huge. It was good for the last 3 years or whatever. Like we did like Aquaman, Enola Holmes 2. There was like loads of all these films we did over last year. Ghostbusters. We did all these like
Wow.
these great things. But then what happened was the strike came. I
Yeah.
don't know if you know about that. So there's the actors' strike came, and it
Yeah.
shut down the industry for, well, it hasn't fully recovered yet. So
Is it
even if the
not?
strike, no, because even though the strike has ended before Christmas, the actual production of has slowed right down. So I think they're probably waiting until the new tax year or whatever before things will really kick back into gear again. So yeah, so just been back on the outside. That's why I'm back out now, doing the more heritage kind of stuff at the minute.
Yeah, I suppose the actors' strike is that it was kind of people kind of saw it as, oh, the actors are striking and the writers are striking, but
Mm,
there's such like, you always hear about it, but there's such a network of people that
there
are
has to be.
involved in the production of films that you don't realize or don't
It's
recognize.
crazy. Right down to like, you got costume, makeup, like catering,
Yeah,
like vehicle rental. Like it's like the list is just absurd. It's this huge machine basically that just completely ground to a halt. Prop houses, all those people. So all those people really suffered for like. So one of the things that was lucky because I've got the trade is while the industry was down, I went back into my normal trade. But there was people out there that are really reliant on the film industry,
mm.
and they've really suffered. We've all suffered, but like they've in particular, some of those people really, really suffered.
I guess a lot of your work slowed right down during COVID as well. Like the pandemic must have.
Well, I mean, that was for me. I ended up working the whole way through.
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't stop at all because what happened was because I was working in like such a massive. It was like a massive private mansion. There was I didn't have to worry about like contaminating meeting people. So we were working in like separate parts of the house and stuff like that. So we were basically able to work the whole way through it. But yeah, it definitely affected lots of other people. Like some of my mates were off obviously for months and stuff like that. But I was lucky enough that I had a project that carried me through it.
So I spoke to a few people now. The like I was busy all the way through COVID, just by the very nature of doing web work, and suddenly everything moved online into websites, and I was busier than I've ever been
Yeah,
throughout the whole of COVID because my work could all be done from my back bedroom, and everybody wanted me more than ever to make sure that their website stayed live.
yeah,
But
exactly.
for a lot of for so many people, it was just horrific.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that's really bad about this is because we obviously had COVID that affected the industry. Then there
Hmm.
was like some restructuring that went on behind the scenes at like Warner Brothers and stuff that had slowed things down last year. Now the strike has come, and it's just like it's just yeah, it just feels very very hard to kind of like get a foothold at the minute. But it will change, and it's going to be very intense when it does come back. So.
Is it just sort of working in London then, the kind of set making and stuff like that, or would you ever get
No,
called
I
up?
was I was up in Scotland. Yeah, I was up in Scotland. That was brilliant. I was working on a film. It never came out. It was Batgirl. I was on that
Oh,
up there. But yeah, it was like for whatever reason, it never came out. But we were up there for I think 3 or 4 months. But yeah, it can be anywhere. Like, but predominantly it is around London, or usually around that M25 band,
yeah.
around all the studios around there, basically.
So you're never getting flown over to the California or New
I haven't
York.
been flown out to California yet, but I mean, the guys like mates of mine were like, in Malta, were working on Gladiator 2, and they do like people go all sorts of places. They end up in Japan doing like Harry Potter museums, all sorts of crazy stuff. It's like yeah, you could end up going some places with it, all right.
Yeah, because I suppose the is it a British fibrous blasting? Is it more of a
No,
British
it would have
film?
been. I mean, we're lucky because we've got so many really, really good fibrous plasters here. But Italian, really, Italian, French, German, and the kind of royal houses and stuff like that. Is where a lot of that would have come around. But in the UK in particular, you've got an amazing history and like so many like top craftspeople here. It's mind blowing. It's such a small place.
It is, yeah, yeah. It's a UK small, I guess, island even smaller. I think what I find just quite amazing is the journey that you've gone from struggling but not enjoying school, of being
Yeah,
very physical, hands on, then not almost by chance, but sort of like having an interest in art, but then wanting to be more in the sports side of things, but just having this niggle of like, right, no, we're going to do art, going to do art, going to do art, and then ended up doing something that's both creative and also hands-on and very physical at the same time, and landing in that role at the foundry,
Yeah.
and to then go now traveling across the country doing something that's also very creative and very physical, but in a very different way. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just
It's been lucky. It's all my uncles. They were all really good tradesmen back home, so I'd always admired tradesmen. So kind of having this thing for me is perfect because it's like that hybrid between the kind of arty kind of side of stuff, the more artisan kind of approach, but at the same time, it's a trade, and it just it just meets perfectly in the middle for me. And what I would say is, like, if there's young people like listening to this, and you want to do something like that, we are crying out for people to get into the trade, because we struggle to get talented young people, and especially for creative people, when like they have an outlook of, it can be very frightening, when you choose to go down that creative route. There's an option out there. If you're willing to roll your sleeves up, get dirty, and get stuck in, there's a great opportunity there.
why do you think it is that there's such a hard time getting people interested in that sort of skill? Is it because people want to do something like they don't recognize it as an opportunity for them, or do
Well,
they?
I think people just don't know what it is. I mean, like, people see it, but they've, like, you'd be amazed if you start looking up. Like that's what I always say to people, like, look up. Like, when you bring your eyes above the first floor, kind of like signage of the shops or whatever, you'd be amazed in the architectural details that are just completely surrounding our lives. But people just don't seem to be aware of it, and I think that's one side of it. I think the other side of it is, it takes like a mix of skills, because it's a wet trade, but at the same time, so you've got to be good with like wet materials like clay, plaster, wax, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you have to have the mind that we'll cut like measurements and plot stuff out. So it's a weird mix, because normally if you're kind of like good at the kind of wet trades, you might like not be so great at the more kind of like stuff like carpentry or joinery type stuff, and vice versa. So finding people where those skills like cross over isn't all that common. And then the other side of it is, it takes a long time to get good at it.
Okay,
Like, you can get to a point where, like, it can be adequate, like, in a workshop, or you can be adequate out in site, and you can be good at, like, one portion of it, but to actually get the whole thing, as I was saying, it's like a lifetime. So people drop out of it for whatever reason, or just aren't necessarily cut out for it, because it takes a rare kind of skill set, really.
yeah, but I guess there's apprenticeships and there are routes into it
Yeah,
for
I mean,
people.
there are. I mean, like, as I said, like, I started out in the Fibrous thing with Hales and How, and like, I'd really recommend them. It's a great place to learn your trade, and they're good people. So it is out there. Like, it just seems to not be just on people's kind of map. Like,
Okay.
people just don't. It's one of those jobs people don't really know about it. Plus, one of the things that can be a bit off-putting as well is, until you kind of get to, let's say, but further down the line with it, you can end up, spending a lot of time on the road, and that doesn't suit people. Like, it can be a real challenging thing. Like, for me, I loved it because I've always been so restless. I've really, really struggled. I'm getting better at it. I'm starting to slow down now. I'm actually finding it much easier to be in the same place for a bit. But back then, I couldn't handle being in the same spot. I needed to be constantly moving and constantly kind of like exploring weird places and stuff. So
It only took 40 years, Tony, but you've finally.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, well, it's about. I mean, when you think of it, it's like 20 years now of doing all sorts of mad skullduggery, you know, to get to this point. Like, but yeah, no, it's paid off, and I enjoy it. That's the most important thing. I love it. I'm happy in my work, so it's not a drag for me. Like, every day I go in, I'm excited to learn.
Yeah, it's exciting work, and I guess the people around you make a big difference as well. Like you
Oh, for
can.
sure. And then you have moments where, you'll cut like a panel out of a wall, and you'll find like an empty bottle of Martel brandy from like 1870, or you'll see where the people that were there before you, like, you'll find newspapers like from, way back, like, porno mags, infamously. One of the guys cut through a panel, and somebody, like, I think it was the last time that panel had been opened, I think it was like the 1800s, but it was someone had written, "Ye be not the first." It's just like I just love stuff like that, you know. Or like you look down, all of a sudden you can see where somebody just like sat and had their lunch, like 150 years before,
Yeah.
and sealed it up, and it's all that kind of stuff. Cigarette packets and like little notes and all sorts of bizarre stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I replaced all the floorboards in my living room, when I pulled them all up, I found some. I think it was like an empty can of Pepsi, and it was like the '60s branding on the can, and
Yeah,
I was like, "What?"
yeah,
I'm glad it. Well, I'm glad. To be honest, I'm glad we found a can from the '60s because I thought all these floorboards were original from like 120 years ago.
right,
So,
yeah, yeah,
so at least someone's done some work in this house in the last
yeah,
50 years.
in the last century, yeah. But yeah, I'll tell you a good story. This like I don't know how you are for time, but I could possibly wrap it up at this one if you wanted. But we did a job up in Blackpool in the Empress Ballroom, which is the second biggest sprung dance floor in Europe. It's a beautiful building. It's like incredibly opulent place. But what happened was this huge dome. Sorry, it was like a vaulted ceiling with these huge coffered vaults had fallen in the middle of the night and landed in the middle of the dance floor. And thank God, like there was no one there when it happened because it would absolutely have killed people. It would have been really bad. So over 4 months, what we did was we had to systematically cut holes in the ceiling, crawl in behind, wire the whole thing up, re-secure everything so nothing, if it did fall, it would be suspended on wires or it was completely restored. But it came to the Easter bank holiday weekend, and we were all keen to get out of there basically. But we were like, look, we'll do one more panel before we go. So we cut through this panel, climb inside, and one of the guys found a newspaper, right, from I think it was like I don't know what it was. It's like late 1800s. But when we opened up the newspaper, it was from the Easter bank holiday weekend, 140 years before.
No way.
Yeah, 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 yeah. If you go on my Instagram, you'll be able to see some of the photographs of it. But it's like that was really that made the hair on my arm stand up. It was like the King
Yeah.
of Spain had been for a visit and all this crazy stuff.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
yeah, proper history
yeah,
in
yeah.
your
Complete,
hands.
almost to the day. You know what I mean? It's like the Easter bank holiday weekend, like 140 years or so. It really spun me out. I was like, this is just too much.
Oh man, it's
Yeah.
been an absolute pleasure. One final thing before we wrap it up, Tony. If you could go back and do it all over again, is there anything you would do differently, and would you have liked to ended up anywhere else?
Well, I mean, I don't have any regrets, but I think I would have been a little bit more gentler on myself and maybe sometimes the people around me because I was so focused on what I was doing. I had this like real intense like need to do what I was doing that sometimes I guess that was kind of hard to live with.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate the patience that my friends and family have given me to allow me kind of go and do this thing. But no, I absolutely love what I'm doing. It's lifelong. I mean, like when people start talking about retiring and stuff like that, I'm like, I'm not going to ever retire. Like, I'll still be shuffling around, like maybe even if it's like 2 days a week or something like that. I'll want to be involved right until I can. It's my life's work. I love it.
That's so good to hear. Because yeah, pretty much everyone I asked that question to has always said, pretty similar thing. But it's always interesting to hear that, like, the attitude of not having any regrets about what they've done, and that people are happy with how they've ended up through the journeys that they've been on, to get to where they are right
Yeah,
now.
well, it's a funny thing. Like I've had this conversation before, and some people think it's got to do with bravery, but what it was for me that the idea of not doing it was so uncomfortable to me that I had to do it. Do you know what I mean? It was like I couldn't see in my mind's eye be doing something else.
Yeah, yeah,
Like I
yeah.
like I know I've had a varied career, but it was all got to do with like creative manufacturing and learning, like and like historical kind of stuff. And that was it. It was very uncomfortable. It forced me to keep going.
Oh, amazing! Cheers. Thank you so much,
Oh, my
Tony,
pleasure,
for
man. My
having a
pleasure. Good to
chat.
see you.
Hopefully, this has been yeah. Hopefully, you've enjoyed having a chat as much as I've enjoyed listening.
Ah, yeah, no, it's been great. Thanks so much for having me on, man.
No worries at all, man. Right, I'll catch up with you soon, Tony.
Ah,
Cheers.
all the best, man. All the best.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to episode 6. If you've listened all the way through the episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a review, maybe even sharing it with your friends. If you've got a story you would like to tell, feel free to get in touch. The email address is in the episode description, along with the links to some of the things we spoke about in the podcast today. I'll be back with another episode Monday next week, so hopefully you'll be hearing again soon. Bye!